How many of you have enjoyed the series? God keeps blowing me away over and over again with these beautiful truths of who He is and who He isn't. This week, I had some pretty disturbing news, and some of you read it in my newsletter. I was sitting in my office, and I got a phone call, and then I started getting text messages, and then I started noticing Facebook was beginning to explode. And one of my friends from high school that I was pretty close to, he committed suicide this week. And I had these moments all throughout the week where I just had a lot of guilt, a lot of sadness that I didn't call him more. You know, I graduated in 99. Holy smokes, that makes me a little bit old, doesn't it? And so I go back there in my mind, and I kept thinking about my friend Adam. And I remember the conversations we would have in my room about God. I remember talking to him, and both of us having all these questions and saying, well, who really is God? And does He exist? And we asked all of these questions. And I had this moment last night when I was going through my notes where I said, God, I wish I had taken an opportunity to tell Adam how good You are. And that started to challenge me, because every day we are given an opportunity to share with someone how good God is. Every single day. And I know if you're like me, you blow it sometimes. You get focused on so many other things going on in life. And so my prayer has been lately, God, give me an opportunity to tell people how good You are. And when I get that opportunity, give me the faith, the confidence to be able to tell them how good You are. So that's my prayer for you. I want to tell you a story about a guy named Jerry. Do we have these pictures of Jerry? Next slide. There's Jerry. Jerry is terrified of the doctor. Poor Jerry. Because Jerry was told when he was younger that the doctor is a scary person. In fact, there he is. He was told that when you go to the doctor doesn't even have fingers. He's just got these needles. Yeah, Edward scissor needles or whatever. I don't know. But the doctor was scary. He would get these needles and he'd do these terrible things, and you should be scared of the doctor. And so Jerry's freaked out. And he knows the day is coming where he's going to have to go to the doctor's office. And so sure enough, Mom and Dad say, Jerry, we're going to the doctor. What? I can't go. He's got needles for fingers. You don't understand. Mom and Dad are like, no, we need to give you these shots. Shots? What? I'm just kidding, Jerry. It's all right. We're just going to do a little checkup. Check what? Up. I don't know. Check. And so Jerry's finally gets talked into doing this. So he goes to the doctor, and the doctor, older gentleman, seems very nice. He's telling jokes with Jerry, and Jerry's beginning to feel a little more comfortable. It's like, oh, okay, the doctor is nice. And then the doctor says this. Jerry, it looks like, he looks on this, it looks like you're due for a shot. That was an amazing noise I just made. I need to remember how to do that. He freaked out. And the doctor takes the needle, gives Jerry the shot, and Jerry in his mind, he's hearing laughing, and this doctor, this scary, terrible doctor, he was right. They're bad, they're evil, they're scary. And ever since then, Jerry has been afraid of the doctor. So like you can imagine at age 33, Jerry is experiencing serious symptoms. His tummy hurts. And in fact, I think that image should be flipped for what I'm going to say. And so his stomach starts to hurt. And it starts to get worse and worse until he can't even stand. He's like, oh, I can't. Oh, and his friends are like, Jerry, go see the doctor. And Jerry's like, no, I'm okay. Jerry, you can barely walk. No, this is fine. This is how I've been walking for years. Jerry, come on, man. I'm okay. Really, I'm okay. And then he does what most of us do when we think we have symptoms of something. We diagnose our own problem, right? He gets on Google and he becomes the expert. And so he looks and he reads it. And sure enough, Jerry has gas. Thank goodness. Jerry's got gas. And so Jerry thinks, boy, this is the worst gas I've ever had. I can't walk. And it gets progressively worse and worse and worse. And after a couple days of doubling over pain, he has a choice. He can go to the doctor's office and get life-saving help he so desperately deserves, or he can stay at home and die of appendicitis. This lie he was told at an early age is going to shortly kill him if he doesn't seek help. And many of us, we have bought into these ideas that God is an angry, wrathful God, that he demands sacrifices. He needs certain things done for him to be happy. Today we're going to delve into that idea about the gods being crazy, needing sacrifices to be happy, needing your works to be satisfied. Let me pray with you. God, I thank you. I praise you that you've brought us here again this morning. And God, I just ask that your words will be heard over mine. And Lord, you will just fill this place with your presence. And Lord, again, let us know how good you are. In your name we pray, amen. So a lot of people have this idea, again, that God is up there somewhere and he's just waiting to drop the hammer down on the world. And we live this scary, fearful life of, well, what if I do wrong? What if, and we get all these scary things, and we begin to think that we need to satisfy him or the hammer will drop. Don't you love that picture? It's terrifying. And so a lot of scholars, I want to take you to Abraham's time. A lot of scholars, when they look at Abraham's time, they believe he lived in the Mesopotamia era. Say that word, Mesopotamia. Don't you feel smart? That was, again, today that would be like Turkey, Iraq, Syria, those places. Back then, Sumer, Babylon, Assyria. And this is really noteworthy in the Bible because this is where the captives are taken. This is where Abraham lived before they went to the promised land. All this is going on. Abraham's culture was saturated in polytheism. There were a bunch of people who believed that there were many different gods. And the gods must be satisfied. In fact, the gods even had human and animal forms, and they had some gods were higher than others. And some gods even every city had a god. And if it was a large enough city, you had multiple gods that you were to satisfy there, that were present there in the city, kind of overlooking it, watching the city. And so all these gods, they even acted similar to humans. Some of the gods, they would need to be satisfied with like food and wine and that kind of thing. And they even had the effects of drunkenness. And so every once in a while, they'd go off and do something crazy. And now there's a million other children. And those children would get angry with the other children. And then you have thunder in the sky. And you have all these things going on, right? And this was happening during Abraham's time. So the gods were going crazy. They built towers. I want you to see this picture. They built towers with staircases that were thought to reach the heavens so the gods could go up and down on them. When I was younger, I used to think that God was mad about the Tower of Babel because people literally built something that almost reached the heavens, and God was getting nervous because what if they get to me? Weird things you pick up from the felt board, right? It's weird things. God was upset because his people were worshiping him like they were worshiping the other gods. They believed that God wasn't present with them, so they needed to build these things so that he would be. And God was so frustrated. He's like, no, that's not who I am. I'm not like those other gods. Here's some other things that they would do that are interesting. They'd build temples and rooms for the gods where they would serve them different foods, often meats. They would close the curtains and allow them to eat. Think about this now. They'd serve them the meats. After the meats were eaten or there was leftovers, which there always was, They would take the meats and they'd bring it before the king and his royal officials. Y'all tracking so far? They'd sit down, and as worship to the gods, they would partake of the meat. Many of you have been told as good Adventists, the Daniel diet, you do the Daniel diet because Daniel did it. You become a vegetarian because Daniel was a vegetarian. I am not knocking vegetarianism. In fact, I think it is probably the healthier way to go. And I applaud you, vegetarians who are living that lifestyle. I want to be there someday. It wasn't vegetarianism. Daniel was a Jew. He ate meat. Daniel, that's the only way I get amens if I talk about meat. Thank you for being here, Paula. The only one that says amen. So, meats, yes. So they would eat the meat, and they would literally be eating it because they were worshiping their pagan god. And so Daniel, when he says, I'm not going to eat the meat, he's saying, I will not worship your gods. Way bigger. I will not worship your gods. I serve the God. I will not worship your gods. It was about worship, and it's always been about worship. It goes on. They would have cleansing stations in the courts where worshipers would wash themselves before entering various stages of worship. Interesting stuff. They would often set up trees or poles, which symbolize portals into the God's realm. Next time you put up your Christmas tree. Temple prostitution was really common. It was a common form of worship. They would do these really degrading things before the gods, thinking that they were satisfying them. Kids chosen at early ages, that was their life. Vile. Then there was the god Adad. This god was known as like the most powerful god. He was associated with the dragon. In fact, he had all the powers of the elements. So think about this. In Revelation, who is God fighting? The dragon. In Revelation, when he comes again, it says that he has power. God shows us he has power over what? All elements. The earth shakes. All of these things begin to happen. God says, no, it's not the dragon who had the power. It was me. Amen? And then, look at Jesus' life. Jesus, when he comes to this earth, he shows over and over again that his life, he had control over the elements that the gods supposedly had, right? He takes care of death. He heals sicknesses. Agriculture, the winds, the sea, all of it have to obey his commands. He proved over and over again he was the one true God. Over and over again. So the biggest characteristic, though, that I notice when you talk about these pagan religions, the one thing you could do to satisfy the gods, if you did this, it was like a guarantee. As a father, your most prized possession during that time was your son. Your firstborn son. And if you sacrificed your firstborn son to the gods, you would be blessed. You would be blessed. And so, it is that time period and these understandings that we have to understand when we read about Abraham in Genesis 22. Because those people didn't serve their gods out of love, they served them out of fear. And I'm going to be very honest with you, folks. I see a lot of us serving God not out of love, but out of fear. And it breaks his heart. So Abraham, we're told that his father, do you guys know his father's name? A little trivia? Nope. Why did I find like satisfaction in that? No, you're wrong. Terah was his name. Yeah, that's right. We got that. Terah. And it says that he served many gods. When you read in the New Testament, there are places in the Old Testament, we find out it's believed that Terah was an idol maker. And then when you read in the Talmud, there's an interesting story that gets repeated over and over again. I'm going to tell it to you. Just fascinating story. Here's the idea, because the question is, where did Abraham get his belief in God if his father was an idol maker? So here it goes. One day, Abraham is with his father at his father's trade, the idol shop. I don't know what idol shop. Go to your nearest idol shop. And so he's with his father at their idol shop, and he's got all these carved images. And the story goes that his father said, "Son, I'm leaving. Watch the shop." So he leaves. And the idea here is that Abraham, like any awkward teenager or 33-year-old, 34-year-old, ew, yuck. Okay, good. I'm growing. So Abraham, he's walking around, moving around, and he bumps one of the idols. And the idol does this in slow motion, like everything does before something terrible happens. And it falls to the ground and it breaks. And Abraham does this because he's waiting for the lightning and the thunder. He's waiting for it because he thinks it's going to happen. He thinks the gods are going to destroy him. And he waits, and he waits, and nothing happens. And so Abraham does this. Well, if that didn't break, knocks over another one, breaks in two. Nothing. He starts knocking them all down. And he realizes these gods have no power. Nothing's happening. All the stories I was told about the gods sending lightning on me for doing these things, it's not real. And so Abraham at this point in time asks himself the question, if these gods aren't real, then who is the one true God? And we're told in this Jewish tradition that Abraham leaves his father's trade and he searches for the one true God. And the one true God finds Abraham. Cool story? So here we go. Genesis 22, 1 through 12. Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. When I was younger, I used to think that this meant when one's faith is tested, it meant I am doing something. I've had so many people sit down with me, Tony, your faith will be tested. And how you respond will show your connection with God. You must have faith. And so your works will be a testimony of how good you are and how much you believe in God. What does that idea center on right there? God or me? Me. That is a Greek way of thinking about God, not a Hebrew. Let me share with you quickly what faith in the Hebrew means. It's going to change the way you view this story. You guys ready? Oof. Okay, here we go. The Hebrew word means firm, something supported. To have faith is not knowing that God exists or doing what he asks you to do. It is that the one with faith will act with firmness in their understanding of God. So Abraham's understanding of God was tested that day. Kind of changes the perspective, doesn't it? Abraham's understanding of God was tested that day. God was on trial. Abraham learned something new about God. So let's see what he learns. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom I love so much. Go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. Abraham understands the culture he lives. I believe Abraham thought this was weird because he's beginning to understand who God is and who he isn't. But he does what God asks. I believe Abraham knew there was something fishy going on. Because watch how he responds. The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey, took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for the burnt offering, set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up, saw the place in the distance. "Stay here with the donkey," Abraham told his servants. "The boy and I will travel a little further. We will worship there, and then we will come right back." Notice, we will come right back. Abraham understood God. We're going to come back. So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders while he himself carried the fire and the knife. Scholars believe that Isaac was anywhere between 18 and 33. Many of them, the majority of them, point out 33 is probably the year they believe he was. 33 years old, he puts wood on his back, climbs up the hill in an attempt to help his father understand who God is. Some of you are missing it. Jesus at 33 carries a cross up a hill to show us who God is. Amen? As the 2 of them walked together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood," the boy said, "but where's the sheep and the burnt offering?" "God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son," Abraham said. And they both walked on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar, arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac, laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, and again, you got to imagine, Abraham is thinking, if I do this, he's gonna bring my son back to life. I still trust God. I still believe that God is a loving God. He is a God that loves me, that would not do this. He's not like the other gods. And God says, don't lay a hand on the boy, right? Through his angel. "Do not hurt him in any way, for I know that you truly fear me." A word associated with understanding. "You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son." And God gives him a sacrifice. I serve a God that doesn't demand sacrifice. I serve a God that becomes one. We serve a God that is not demanding things from us. He's asking us to just open our eyes so that we can see who he is. Abraham began to understand what God was like, and that was changing his life. But the sad thing is this: all throughout Israel's history, we have these really good moments where they get it, and then we have these really low moments where they don't. And it goes up and down, up and down. They're totally basking in God's presence, fully understanding his character. Joshua, and then Judges, bam, we don't get it anymore. Over and over again. We have these verses. I don't have a lot of time. I'm running out. Write these down in your notes. Psalm 34:21, Romans 6:23, James 1:15, Galatians 6:8. Romans, if you think about this one, the wages of sin is what? But the of is eternal life. When I move toward death, I find it. When I move toward life, toward God, I find life abundantly. And God's people over and over again show us this, and we see it on the cross. Here's life, here's death. Why would you choose death? As I talk about God's character, I always have people come up to me and they're like this: "That's all good news, Pastor. But what about," and then they'll drop it. And you can almost see like some satisfaction. "Well, what about?" Yeah. And I love it. I love it. We have life groups happening right now where we've been studying Matthew. And we are just enjoying asking questions right now. Please come to them, folks. Wednesdays, Thursdays, they're awesome. We're asking these questions and we're getting uncomfortable and we're disrupting the way we think. And we're saying, wait, what about this? What about that? The Bible was meant to be read together. Not just alone in some room by yourself. Read it together. That's powerful when that happens. And so they ask me these questions, and here are some things that come up. Jonah. What about Jonah? Think about Jonah for a moment. Jonah chapter 1, verse 2. God tells Jonah, announce his proclamation of where they were heading. But notice what Jonah does with that message. He says in verse 4 of chapter 3, he says, you will be destroyed in 40 days. I often wonder this, because I don't know how many of you have kids, but when you tell your kid to do something, go tell your brother that I need him in the kitchen. Sister goes, and the message becomes this: you are in so much trouble. You're probably grounded for life. What did I do? You didn't show up for the dinner table. I didn't know. Well, I'm telling you now. But what? But I'm still grounded? You'll see. And so I see this with Jonah, this 40 days. But what happens next? That is the phrase I've been asking myself over and over again. What happens next in the story? Because a lot of us, we like to take proof texts and we like to make our point of view, and we'll take this verse out of context and make it say something it doesn't. But the question we have to ask ourselves when we're reading God's story is, what happens next? Did God come and just destroy it all? What happens next? This is what happens next. God waits patiently for these people who have had these messed up ideas about the gods. He waits patiently, and then he offers grace where condemnation and wrath would have been given. I'm learning to remind people to keep reading. In Ezekiel 24:9, there's an interesting one too. I've had this brought up. In fact, Timothy Jennings even brings this one up. By the way, read his book, The God-Shaped Brain. Beautiful concept of the loving character of God. Chapter 24, verse 9 through 11. Someone brought this up to me as well, Ezekiel. They said, what kind of God is this? And we'll listen. This is what the sovereign Lord says. What sorrow awaits Jerusalem, the city of murderers? That's not very nice, God. I will pile up the fuel beneath her. Yes, heap on the wood. Let the fire roar to make the pot boil. Cook the meat with many spices, and afterwards burn the bones. And it goes on, and you have to think, that's a little scary, right? You can like picture God over the big pot, boiling it. You're next. That's terrifying. But what happens next? What I notice happens next is that God gives the people exactly what they asked for. They say, God, we don't want you in our lives. We'd rather serve the other gods. So he says this. Okay. And he has to back away. He steps back. Like any relationship, when someone tells you, I don't want you in my life anymore. Sometimes we step back. And God steps back. And what happens is this. His people begin to experience death. They become weak, and they begin to cry out for him again. And God was waiting patiently, because when they cried out again, what did he do? We have the stories of Daniel. We have the stories of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When these stories happen, God jumps at the chance to free his people. What happens next? When problematic verses come up, I ask two questions. What happens next? And the next one, what does Jesus' life suggest about this? What light does his presence on earth bring us? I'm tired of people telling me that Jesus has to be accountable to the Bible. The Bible is accountable to Jesus. The Bible, the rest, all of this stuff was all leading to who he is. It was always about him. hold the Bible accountable to Jesus and watch what happens when you read it. Powerful things happen. And so 1,000+ years later, Rome is now in power, and God's people again have lost sight of who he is. They're in captivity again, and they're beginning to ask, where is God? And then instead of sacrificing humans like they used to, because that's been outlawed, they now have the Colosseum. You know that that's what they considered worship? That was church for those folks? That was worship. What a messed up idea of worship. Can you imagine our God looking down and being happy with that? Sickened him. They would have used all these different ideas about temple prostitution, all of it they were doing again. And they had these 3 gods. They had Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. Jupiter, the king of the gods. He controlled all the elements. He reigned above. The next one, Neptune, the god of the sea. And then the god of the underworld, controlled death. These 3 different gods, a godhead, if you will, right? So there's this godhead, and they would punish their followers in drunken rages, fight amongst themselves, demand sacrifices to be happy. Put this in juxtaposition now with our God and this concept of Godhead. Think about this. The Son, Jesus, becomes human, lowly, and meek to show us who God is. Totally different, right? The next one, the Father. He's not up there screaming down punishments. He loves, offers his own Son to come down and show us what he looks like. And then the Spirit doesn't strike fear in people, but his presence gives life, moving people to a relationship with the Father. The Jewish nation replaced the Godhead with a disgusting, fear-driven Roman understanding of God. They believed God needed to be satisfied. He was angry. They needed to do works to be justified. God was literally pushing sickness and death on them. The sacrificial system that they were keeping, they literally believed then that the sins were being removed by their action. To this culture, Jesus comes, and his coming defies everything the gods stood for. Jesus came as a humble birth, offsetting the dignified, power-hungry gods of Greece and Rome. Folks, if there's ever a moment to start saying amens, get ready. You guys ready for this? Here we go. Maybe. Okay. He showed the beautiful elements of humanity: compassion, empathy, love, honor. The pagan gods showed the worst of humanity: greed, anger, and lust. Jesus healed sinners, touched the sick and the poor. The gods punished these people. The gods used nature to strike fear. Jesus calms the waters. The gods were gaudy and extravagant, lived in palaces. Jesus was homeless. The gods taught war and vengeance. Jesus taught shalom. The gods brought judgment and damnation. Jesus accepted sinners. The gods guilted and shamed followers with rigid traditions. Jesus says, "Where are your accusers? I don't condemn you. Go in peace. Move toward life." The gods were distant. Jesus lived among us. The gods built walls around themselves. Jesus tears the curtain in two. The gods demanded sacrifice. Jesus becomes one. The gods died away with each culture. Our God is more present today than ever. We make God in these weird images and we get scared and we think we need to satisfy him. Those are evil, messed up ideas. And I don't want to live like that anymore. I want to serve God not out of fear, but out of love. And everything I do when I'm moving toward life is a beautiful example of what life looks like. Not because I'm afraid he's going to be mad at me, but because I'm experiencing life and I want more. That is motivation enough. Stand with us as we... Sorry. Oh, we ran out of time. That's so sad. I like that last song. Get up here and sing that song. Stand up. We're going to sing a song.